Hey everybody, welcome. This is Sara Gazarek. For those that don't know, I am the artistic director of the DeMiero Jazz Festival, and I'm so excited to be here with you this year, when and however you are watching this video. This is a special year for those who have participated in the DeMiero Jazz Festival in the past, like myself. You probably remember it as a really high energy, fast-paced, in-person, intensive weekend where you get access to incredible artists, incredible educators, hang with your friends, learn a whole bunch. For me, it was a weekend where I fell in love with this music and decided to pursue it for the rest of my life as an artist. And so, of course, when the pandemic hit last year, for those that remember, when we had to, after our Thursday intensive, push pause, rethink things, and try to reconfigure what we were doing, sort of immediately after that festival, we had a big meeting with the board and decided that we wanted to try to make sure that we were able to provide an experience for our young people in the Pacific Northwest and beyond, whether or not we were in person. And so we're so excited to launch things with one of our first videos, and a series of videos that we're going to be releasing every single week, where you guys at home are going to have access to artists and educators and different groups, and in the same way that you would in that intensive weekend, but spread out across the entire year. So we are recording this one at the beginning of October. I'm in my home in Los Angeles. You can probably hear the ice cream man coming down the street. You might hear my dog bark at some point. But everyone at home is going to have access to our incredible educators and world-class artists. Each week we're going to have different videos in the format like today's. Sometimes it's a masterclass tutorial on a topic that's related to something in the jazz genre. And sometimes it's going to be a hang with one-on-one, like in person with some of the incredible artists and teachers that we're going to be working with. The most important part to remember is that the inspiration and the music doesn't stop just because we're stuck at home. So we have a lot to look forward to this year. I think that everyone at home is experiencing the pandemic in different ways. I'm sure that we have some schools participating in the Pacific Northwest. I would imagine that we have some schools participating internationally. Because we are a virtual format this year, it's going to be a pretty widespread, which we're really excited about. But wherever we are, I think everyone can attest to this feeling of disconnect, right? And longing to be in the same room with other people and to feel human touch and, to hug our friends. It's a challenging place to be. But our hope in spreading this out over a series of months was to sort of share the love a little bit and to give people access to experience things at any point when they're able, right? That some jazz choirs meet on Mondays, some jazz choirs meet on Tuesdays at 8 a.m., while others meet at Tuesday at 1 p.m., right? And so we are all able to experience this communal event whenever we're available to, but then it does culminate in March in a 3-day festival where we are watching a giant group choir performance for those who decided to participate in one of the 3 performances, the songs that we're all learning together. We're all watching the same videos, we're all watching the same performers, and then hopefully in some of the live chats, we're all able to be there together and talking about and sharing some of these different experiences and questions and laughing together and learning together and continuing to stay inspired and to continue to fall in love with this genre. Well, I think many jazz artists would agree that jazz is an art form that prides itself on authenticity, and it's something that we're all striving for at all times, right? Mastery of instrument, mastery of musical concepts for the sole purpose of being able to be as expressive and authentic as possible in the moment, with the big hope of creating an opportunity for our audience members to hopefully see themselves reflected in the art that we've created, right? The downside of that is that because this is a genre that prides itself on authenticity, when we are feeling, sad, depressed, lethargic, unmotivated, a lot of times that presents itself in our art. So a lot of the jazz musicians that I know have had a very hard time being productive through quarantine, particularly because it is a genre that also thrives on interaction, right? On hearing someone to the left of you and someone to the right of you and responding in that moment to what's happening in those relationships, those musical relationships. So I think the first few weeks and few months were very hard for me. It's challenging for me as an artist to just sit down at the piano and write a song by myself, especially because there was just so much happening in the world. You know, there continues to be so much happening in the world, so much civic unrest with all of the election going on, just kind of the standing of, you know, the United States in regards to the rest of the Western world. There's a lot of stress floating around. And I know a lot of musicians and a lot of artists who identify as empaths and have a hard time not taking that on. And I definitely identify as that as well. I do feel fortunate in having a musical collective in a vocal group called Sage, and actually representing at the moment my Sage swag. This is a shirt and a design that was designed by Cecile McLaurin-Salvat, who was recently awarded the MacArthur Grant, MacArthur Genius Grant. She's such an icon and such a blessing in the jazz community and beyond. But Sage is an all-female vocal group, just female voices. Two of the artists are from the Pacific Northwest. Shawnee Kendrick, incredible artist, educator, recording musician, and the great Amanda Taylor, formerly of Groove for Thought, truly one of the greatest arranging voices that I've ever met. And then Erin Bentledge, another incredible educator, vocalist based in Los Angeles. And I think because we all love each other, and because we all are somewhat, I guess I wouldn't even say somewhat, because we are all incredibly devoted to the success of the group, and we are accountable to each other. We have weekly meetings where we talk about our productivity and what's on the table and what needs to happen and what the deadlines are. That's been incredibly rewarding. We have a Patreon page that we connect with our artists often, and have intentionally created a student Patreon level where our students can access everything for a much cheaper price. But having an audience who's like waiting for content every week has been a really great catalyst in continuing to move forward. So in quarantine, I think we've done three long-distance videos and probably 4 or 5 long-distance recordings. We continue to arrange. We've done 2 original compositions long-distance. So for those who are at home and find themselves frustrated and longing for that one-on-one interaction, or even just some kind of creative outlet outside of school, I would say don't feel like you have to tackle creativity alone. That it is something that if you have a community of people, even just one person or 4 people, that you want to read a book together and talk about it, or read a poem together and talk about it, or try to write a song together. It feels a little weird in the beginning to write a song over Zoom. But like anything, like the first time I had broccoli at 8 years old, I didn't like it. You have it more. I like it now. It gets better. Same thing with writing over Zoom. Now we're just like bing, 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 so quick, so fast. And the other upside of that is that we all have had to learn how to be as independent as possible. Like I wonder if I can share my screen, if it'll still show what it is that I've been working on. I'm editing a Sage music video myself. I have to tell you, it's pretty epic. We've all had to kind of like learn how to do this as we go. But just continuing, for me as an artist, feeling somewhat beholden to people that I love helps a lot. Okay, here comes this Sage video. And this is like, I don't think this is going to work if I try this. That was like, I'm in the middle of an edit there, but it's going to be good. I promise. Stay tuned, Sage. So something that people often ask, a lot of different artists is like, how do you create? And I think the answer is different for every person. And the answer for me, if asked on a different day, might be totally different as well. And I always have been someone who has longed for expression over impressing people, right? And sometimes if I'm actually expressing something with the tools that I have on that day, it might not necessarily be like the craziest, coolest, hippest thing. But the benefit of doing it that way is that I know at the end of the day that it's something that speaks from my soul, and that I can only develop my voice as I continue to go, right? So I think about it similarly to like building vocabulary, that when you're a baby, like a baby points at something and is like, water, and or like wah wah, and the mom's like, oh, he wants water, right? Hands in the water. And then when the baby's 4, he's like, Mom, I want water. Okay, great. And then, you know, when the baby's 10, hey Mom, could you grab me some water? Yes, honey. And then, you know, like you continue to develop vocabulary, but at no point was that kid like, oh, I wish I knew how to say it better, right? So pushing ourselves as we're creating to embrace the vocabulary that we have on that day and to work with that, right? In recognizing that if we speak every day, we're going to get better every single day. So I've heard, the word on the street is that Dolly Parton, for those who know of her, one of the greatest songwriters of all time, Dolly writes a song supposedly every single day. And if you think about the number 1 hits that she's written, there's probably been about 20 or something. But there are probably somewhere more, like over 5,000 songs. If she's been writing songs for the last 30 years, that's a lot of songs. And probably a lot of songs that aren't super exciting to her, right? But I feel like if you can start with like, okay, what do I know? You know, okay, this is a chord. What does it sound like? Oh, that kind of works too, but that sounds different. Right? And just kind of like develop your ear. I don't know what I was playing. I literally wasn't looking at the piano, but I let my ears guide me. Great. My friend named Jeff, he's a really nice guy, and I want to know because I got another guy, because I know that I know, but then no, right? Like, whatever. And then I wrote a song. Great, thank you. And then you get to a point where you're able to say, okay, I recognize this. Right? Where you're able to hear certain things and you know that those are chord progressions that mean a lot to you. You're just developing your voice. So don't feel bad embracing what you know in that moment. Like I love a good 1 chord, going to the dominant 3 to the 4, right? That's one of my favorite progressions. But the other side of the coin is thinking about when you're composing or arranging, what is this song about? Oh, geez, bear with me. And how can I breathe life into it, right? So even just from an arranging standpoint, I was commissioned recently to arrange a version of Ain't No Mountain High Enough. We all know that song. Ain't no mountain high enough. It's like so big, right? And I was thinking, like, what if it was a really tender, sweet love song that you sing to someone as you're like falling asleep together, you know, like a quiet little room. And I don't know a lot of chords on ukulele, but I love writing on ukulele because I don't know much. And so it's like I'm kind of boxed in. And so I was like, okay, what if I start here and just like played shapes, right? Ain't no mountain high. Okay, that works. Ain't no valley low. Ain't no river wide enough, baby. Oh, cool. Okay, it works. If you need me, call me, no matter where you are, no matter how far, don't worry, baby. Right? Okay, it all works. Awesome. Let's see where it goes. Ain't no mountain high enough. Oh, okay, I like it. Ain't no valley low. Where did I go next? Low enough. Ain't no river wide enough to keep me from getting to you, babe. Or something like that. But it's like 3 chords, right? And so it's not like, it's in 7, there's all these chord substitutions, it's crazy. It's like, if I wanted to arrange a really aggressive, kooky, crazy song that's fiery and intense, right? Like Jeff Keezer did for that version of Jolene that I have that Sage recently recorded and received a Grammy nomination from my latest CD. Jeff is a big gun, right? Like he's an incredible arranger. So he was one that I called in specifically to help arrange Jolene. But in terms of composition, starting with something that means something to you, something that is inspiring to you, and then just doing your best to give it life and not feel bad for what comes. Think of it as a muscle and just keep writing. If you write every single day, your songs will get better, but you have to be bad at something before you can be good at it. It's really important to remember that. I think one of the benefits of growing up now versus like 40 years ago is that there's so much available to young people these days online, right? That there are like fake guitars that you can like plunk a guitar string on a website, right? Or like play a piano on a website, or programs where you can literally put in musical information that's sampled and you have no idea necessarily technically what's happening beyond just what you're hearing. And so what I would encourage my young students who are just getting their bearings in music and don't necessarily have access to instruments or don't necessarily have training in music theory is to embrace that, like, that's fine. You know, you can still write songs with or without a piano, with or without a guitar, right? I could still go, my man's named Jeff and he's a really nice guy and I want to know because of the mountain in the sky and I want to know because of the dog and I want to know, no, good guy, right? Like, I just wrote a song, you know? I don't have to know, oh, what was that chord, right? Like, I don't know. So just write. For people who are thinking they want to write, just write. Just write. You don't need to know what it is yet. It'll come. For those who are just getting going writing and do have access to things, again, like, just write. Doesn't matter. It's not going to be your opus one. Any incredible composer has never felt like they've written their opus one. We all are still working on it. You just get used to that sensation of like, oh, I'm almost there. Let me write my next tune. Oh, that wasn't my opus one. Let me write my next tune. But your understanding of how to express your voice just gets deeper. So for those at home who maybe don't know, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest and went to Roosevelt High School, and even at Eckstein, I was the TA for the jazz band, and so I was aware of what was happening in terms of sounds and colors and shapes, but I didn't know that I loved it until I went to Roosevelt High School, and at the time, the jazz choir was taught by Scott Brown, who is an award-winning educator and directs the jazz band at Roosevelt, and has taken them to, first place in a lot of different national and international competitions, and has received so many awards as an educator, and incredibly grateful to have gotten my start at Roosevelt. But like many of you at home watching this, I didn't know much about jazz before I got to Roosevelt, and was so curious and so drawn to it because of how available the art was for me as a young person, right? Like when I was a lead in the musical, I was meant to be Meg Brocky, who was, a Scottish woman who had bright orange hair and flirted with everybody, right? And so I was Meg. But when I would walk into that choir room and sing a solo on Round Midnight, I was supposed to be Sara, which was really exciting, that jazz wanted me to be myself, even as a 16-year-old, that I was able to breathe myself into that art. And how cool and how rare that was something that was supposed to happen instead of continuing to be in this box of blocking and memorization. Like, I was allowed to be improvisatory and myself. I can express something even as a 16-year-old. How cool. So when I was younger, Michael Jackson, Madonna, New Kids on the Block, like everybody, anything that was on the radio I was really excited by. But when I got to Roosevelt and was hipped to the Count Basie Orchestra and Ella Fitzgerald, that first record, the first jazz record that I owned was an Ella Fitzgerald Count Basie Orchestra record called On the Sunny Side of the Street, and that changed my life. For anybody who just wants to learn about swing feel, start there. It's sort of like that book, Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. It's like everything I need to know I learned from Ella and Basie. And it really just started there. I moved on to get a degree in jazz studies from the University of Southern California, where I teach now. I lead the jazz choir there and teach privately. So like anything, jazz is sort of like, if we think about it like an onion, right? There's like layers. Like Ella Fitzgerald is the outside layer, kind of a household name, right? If you pull back that layer, Sarah Vaughan, Carmen McRae, pull back that layer, Betty Carter, pull pull back that layer. Julie London, pull back that layer. Like there's always layers, more and more layers, right? And that's just people who are in the great American standard songbook tradition of jazz singing. And then we haven't even moved into the contemporary jazz scene yet, right? Of like listening options of living jazz musicians who not only have taken the tradition, but are breathing new life into it and changing the sound and incorporating other things, right? Like the Jacob Colliers of today who have incorporated harmony and fusion and contemporary pop sounds, right? Or even, Gregory Porter, who maybe is more of a Donny Hathaway soul plus jazz singer, right? Like there's always new ways to keep going. But I would just encourage people to start peeling back the layers, right? And recognizing that the cool thing about Spotify playlists is that if I listen to the Ella Fitzgerald Spotify playlist, I'm going to discover an artist that I'm not super crazy about, but I'm also going to discover a number of artists that are on the next layer and the next layer and the next layer of that onion. History and context withstanding. Jazz is an art form that was built on the shoulders of Black American creatives, right? And a lot of the popular music of today is music that came out through the Black American experience. And so, it would be remiss not to acknowledge that at its roots, jazz is a music that speaks to social and civil justice, right? Every great jazz musician, literally every great jazz musician, at some point has written a song, performed a song, made some kind of alliance, some kind of acknowledgement in recognizing that this is a genre for the people, right? In celebration of and in service to the people. It's an expressive genre, and it's meant to be a healing art form at its core. It goes so much deeper than music theory and notes on a page and swing feel and academic deconstruction of harmony, right? It's really easy to get wrapped up in how a sharp 11 resolves, right? Why we use a half whole diminished scale over a whole half diminished scale. But it is incredibly important that as jazz musicians, it is our duty to rise to that call, socially and civically, right? That whether it's in writing a song that's meant to remind us, of the importance of female relationships, for women in their female relationships. If it's a song written by Janae Kendrick that speaks to, that she wrote for her daughters, two beautiful Black little girls, in trying to remind them that, the world might be telling them that they don't matter, but they do. If it's, Max Roach writing an entire album dedicated to social injustices, right? Like it's something that every jazz musician speaks to. And so for those who love jazz, I would say most acknowledge that is our duty as musicians to speak to and to create art that speaks to the human condition, and to involve ourselves in what's happening in the world and recognizing that politics is a part of that. Equality is a part of that. Human rights are a part of that. And it's something that makes people feel uncomfortable from time to time. But if it's not making people think about themselves or their actions in the world or other people's lives, what is the art in that art, right? Other than that, it's just entertainment, and that's not the genre. One thing that I get asked in almost every interview, be it newspaper or radio, is what is jazz? That's something that everybody wants to know, because I think the general public recognizes that every jazz musician would define it differently, right? So historical context, withstanding, recognizing that I am a 38-year-old white woman living in 2020, and that this is my definition of a genre that would change day to day. I would say that jazz music is a music that was built on the shoulders of Black American music, and celebrates Black American musicians, that quickly became adopted as a great American art form, and whose artists have devoted their lives to the craft of mastery of instrument, for me, voice, every color, every part of my range, every shape, every sound, every formant, every part of my register, mastery of that instrument, and mastery of musical concepts, harmony, rhythm, shape, line, motif, theory, for the purpose of expression of human experience and concepts in an improvisatory, authentic way that can happen in the moment in response to what's happening around us. And what's happening around us can mean my drummer just hit his cymbal, my pianist just played that chord. It can also mean political unrest and division. It can also mean awareness of injustice happening in different demographics, and particularly between different races in the country. And so I think the desire in jazz musicians, in an attempt to dig deep and be as authentic and expressive as possible, it's inevitable that jazz musicians would speak to the human condition in a way that breathes truth and life into whatever they're experiencing in that moment. And sometimes it's deep, deep anger and resentment and frustration. And sometimes it's the most transcendent, delighted love, right? And so the willingness to embrace the highest of highs and the darkest of lows creates this spread that most people don't experience in their lifetimes, but jazz musicians force themselves to experience on a daily basis, which is probably why we're all so like, crazy. And it's a lot, and I think that that's why a lot of people, there are people out there who want to know about what's happening in the fast food industry in the United States. And there are people who really just want to watch a rom-com, right? And we're all in different moods for different experiences, but I think that that's why there are certain people who really love art, specific to human expression, like jazz, because they're really seeing their own beauty and evils reflected in what they're experiencing, but then also recognizing that, that spread is so deep and so real, that there might be some people that just want to watch The Office, and that's okay. So typically, the vocal ensemble that I work with at USC has a rhythm section and anywhere from 8 to 16 voices. And because USC's campus is 100 remote, 100, because USC's campus is 100% online, this semester, a lot of the ensembles have shifted. And so my vocal ensemble is actually a smaller vocal combo now. And so we meet once a week and we listen to music and we write arrangements together remotely. And everybody records their individual parts, sends them to the next person, individual part, send it to the next person, individual part, send it to the next person. And the only reason why this is able to work is because we have a spreadsheet that talks about, all of the different settings and how to bounce the tracks and, what bit rate and all of that stuff so that we're all on the same page. But making sure that we get together every single week and just listen to music, talk about what we're hearing, and then create together and continue to brainstorm, play different musical ideas, come up with things together, creates a really fun atmosphere where we're all able to collaborate together and still feel like we're making music. So I'm really proud of all the people who are recording remotely and finding ways to continue to do it. But that's what we're doing at USC. Last semester, though, we were completely online halfway through the semester, so we had to scramble a little bit to find a way to stay inspired with an ensemble of 16 singers and rhythm section. And so one thing that we did often was the songs that we were learning, we would watch videos of other groups performing those songs. So one of the songs was a real group song. Let's watch the real group perform it live. What do we notice? What do they do? What can we do? What do we hear? Do we want to do something that they're doing? Great. And then watching a smaller middle school or high school, beginning level high school group perform it? What do we hear? What are they doing? What are we learning? What can we do differently? What do we notice about stage presence, right? So watching other groups perform the repertoire that we are performing was a really cool tool. And then, of course, bringing in lots of guests, like we're doing with the DeMiero Jazz Festival, and allowing people to have access to different performers. Last year, we had a lot of incredible guests, like Kurt Elling, Michael Mayo, Gretchen Parlato, Cecile McLaurin-Salvant. We had a lot. I'm trying to remember all of them. We had so many awesome clinicians come in and talk to my group about different things. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. We had a good time. I think if there were three things that I could offer, three little bits of advice that I could offer, it would be to recognize that the only constant is change, and that at some point we will be back in schools with each other and we will be back on the stage together at the DeMiero Jazz Festival. But with that, this is a really interesting, strange, but beautiful time, right? Like we're learning things that we wouldn't normally have to learn. And so we're all growing, continuing to grow. It's just not in the way that we're used to. So recognizing that it isn't going to end, but it is kind of special and different, right? Like normal jazz festival, we wouldn't be spending 5 months together. We would just have 3 days. The second bit of advice would be to keep going. Please, 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 please. We need you. Jazz music needs you. The third bit of advice is to eat a lot of delicious baked goods because they make me feel better in quarantine. And so I have found a lot of joy in baking things and eating them. So however that translates for you at home, if you need to binge watch Grey's Anatomy for 4 days, like you just got to do what you need to do to stay engaged in the world, happy in the world, embracing all aspects of your experience, because it's only going to add to who you are as a well-rounded person. My name is Sara Gazarek. You've been spending time with the artistic director of the DeMiero Jazz Fest. And all I can say is that I'm really excited to watch the videos that are coming. I am aware of who we're going to be doing interviews with, who we're going to be doing masterclasses with, who we're going to be doing one-on-one hangouts with, and it's going to be an incredible year. So buckle up, stay tuned, and get ready. We're going to have fun. The end.